Hi, Ben. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, doing good. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good. That's good.
Nice. Yeah, saw the update to the design doc proposal.
For connecting events, I mean, or
Yeah, for Eiffel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that section
Yeah.
because I was kind of curious about it.
I haven't
So
finished it yet, but I started at least. Yeah.
oh, okay, cool. Maybe I'll hold my questions then. Because I noticed that like it is kind of similar that it does reference past events. So this actually might be preferable to like trace context and whatnot. So
Yeah, I think maybe we'll discuss it today as well, but I think it was valuable to see with real examples what it would look like. So I
right.
tried to do it for Eiffel, didn't really finish that, but I think that would be valuable to have for all these three, or I don't know if we would have more more variants of it. So because that's easier maybe to discuss around when we have real examples.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hi, Andrea. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Emil. Hi, Ben.
Hey.
Sorry I'm late. How are you doing?
Yeah, no worries. Doing good. How about you?
Yeah, good. It's Monday, so
yeah,
it's fine. A long week ahead, but that's fine. Yeah, so all mentioned in the channel that he won't be joining today, so I guess we won't discuss past events. Shall we get started? Do you think?
I think we can. Yeah.
All right. Do you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so that's the usual agenda. So welcome to the CDEvents working group. Today is February the 13th. My name is Andrea Fritto. I work for IBM, and I'm GNT, and the participant already signed in, so thanks for that. The first thing for the release, I mean, we had in the roadmap 0.2 for February the 16th, which I think at this point is not likely to happen. Right. Do we want to discuss this now, or
maybe it's easier if we have a grip of what is remaining, maybe, so we can maybe focus this meeting on looking at what remains, and maybe I don't know if we should replan something, and then when we see the full load of it, maybe we can easier see when it's feasible to have it.
okay. All right. Would it make sense to go quickly through the other things and updates, and then we start with a roadmap review then?
Sounds good, yeah.
Okay. All right, so the only action items that I found was the one you commented on already, Emil. We can document in the primary that if there is risk of confusion between object and its execution, we should append run to the subject that we discussed last time. And yeah, so that's we created an issue for that, so thanks for that. Oh, hi, Brad. Welcome to the meeting.
Everybody.
So for test events, there were some updates and some further comments. As I was saying, I'll mention that he's not able to join today, so he will review the latest comments on the VR, and that's next step for that.
So about the incident events, I'm not sure how far we are off from being able to finalize that. I think I haven't reviewed it fully myself yet. There are quite some changes there. I'm not sure. I mean, we haven't said before that it needs to be in 02, but if possible, then, or if it's there, of course, in that time frame, we could include it. Or should we strive for having it there and therefore delay the release, you think?
Yes, so I guess depending on how we get when we think the release is there, we can decide. I mean, if it's a matter of a few days, we can stretch and include it in the release. I think it will be great. And I think from my perspective, yeah, they're getting quite close to being ready. But of course, I mean, I would like to see your review as well, so we can have multiple points of view.
And then real quick, the V2 or V.2, is that because I saw it says planned for February 16th. Is that the actual date for publishing .2?
That's what we planned before Christmas, I think, or but that's what I was mentioning in the beginning, that we might want to reschedule it, so we wanted to go through the roadmap today.
Right. Okay, because yeah, I was
plan.
just wondering, yeah, with the test event, it seems like it's been changed quite a bit. So I'm just kind of wondering, because I did do a brief look over it. What do you guys usually finalize? I guess my question is you guys usually finalize something like a few days before, or like what's the process, I guess, getting something into like the release candidate? I guess it's not code, it's more specs, so it's not as big of a deal, but I'm just kind of curious, like, is it generally like you guys do like the full review, and if things look good, it makes it into the this point to release, even if it's day of, for instance?
Yeah, I think we only did one release until now, so we don't have like a very formalized set process for that. I think as long as we are in early releases in 0. We can probably try to be quite quick. So I mean, of course, we want to review and everyone discussing it, but I wouldn't be too concerned if there is a change done shortly before the release. But yeah, in future we might want to be more careful as soon as we start getting also more adoption, and so
yeah, I agree. And also given the statement that we might, or I don't know, probably will end up in non-backwards compatible changes before we get to 1.0. I mean, we are not that afraid yet, at least, of doing such changes. So I think it's quite okay to get something out there and get people starting to use it, and then we can reevaluate if that was a bad idea or not, or if we need to change something for the next release before we get to 1.0. Of course, when we have 1.0, then we need to have a more formal process and probably get a larger group of people reviewing it and accepting it before getting it into the new release and so on.
Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a process, but okay, cool. Good to know.
Yeah.
We can create an issue. Create an issue about describing what the process might look like in future, so we can have that in our roadmap and do not forget about it.
Yep.
So thanks for bringing this up, Ben.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, and anything else on test events or release process? Okay, then moving forward, for the incident events, I think I feel like we're converging to at least an initial set of events and predicates and formulation that looks okay. And there is one comment from Matthias that is not addressed right now that I wanted to discuss, but yeah, Matthias is not here, but maybe we can get your opinion on that, and it's regarding the type. So when we discussed how we want to structure events in the past, like the basic structure of context and subject, and how the context look like, how the subject look like, we agreed that we would have in the subject, we would have ID and source common to all the subjects, and then we would have type and the content. The idea of the type being there to help SDKs parse the content as the content is event specific, basically. Now that's the way at least the Go SDK works. And that's how it is documented, I believe, in the root spec. But the type has not been included in the schemas till now, I think. No, actually the type is in the schemas as well, but the value of the type is not been included in the schema as well yet, and the type is not in the markdowns. So if you look at incident detected, for instance, that this is one of the new ones, but it's the same for everyone. Sorry, if you look at the incident, there is ID source, the other fields, but we don't include the type, and it's true if you look at other existing things as well. So Mattia was saying that people will look at the markdown, not at the schemas, and because the type is not in the markdown, so we would be effectively adding the type by adding it in the markdown. Personally, I disagree. I think, I mean, we agreed on that in the past, and we have the SDK producing the type, and it's in the examples. We don't have many examples, but at least in the one we have. So I believe the type is part of the event today, but I wanted to get some.
Wait, so is it generally the event type not in the markdown? And what is the concern with it not being in the markdown? And then what is the concern with having it in the markdown?
The event type is in the markdown. We have a subject type as well.
Oh, right. Okay. And that's not in the, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's not in the markdown, but it is in the schema, and it is, I believe, in the core spec. Let me check, maybe I'm mistaken. And it is in the SDK.
Okay.
So if you go to spec,
subject.
Yeah, so it's subject, it has an ID, and it has an optional source and an optional type.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that the type is optional is because content for some events may be empty. So if the content is empty, you don't need to specify a type. Even though I would argue we could consider moving this to mandatory, but that's another discussion.
Right. And then, so I guess the question, so the concern is if we leave it out, people are not going to see it basically. And then what was the concern about having it in?
I think if I read Matthias' comments correctly, is that because we don't have it in the event-specific markdowns, people who has been implementing CDEvents until now would not have type in, basically. And so that if we add it now, we would actually be adding it something new. That's.
I think if it was required, I would agree with Mattia if that's his name. I'm not familiar with who that is, but if it is optional, then I think as long as we mention it somewhere, like we already do in the core spec, it's fine in my opinion, because it is optional. But if we do decide to make it actually more of a like you were saying, like move it and actually have it be more of a formalized and actually be required, for example, if content is present, then I would move to say, okay, that probably needs to be in the markdown then.
I think as a reader, it might be confusing to see an event in JSON format and then trying to understand what are these different fields. Of course, in the schema, they are seen, but there's no description there what they mean. And then the obvious way would then go to the documentation for that specific event and see, well, what does it mean then in this event documentation? And then it doesn't say there either. All the other fields are there, but not then the optional ones and specifically not the type. So I would agree that it should either be explicitly stated there, or there should be at least a reference to where the general or common fields are. And then we might not even need to have the ID and subject, ID or source there either. They can also be referenced to the core spec if we don't want to reiterate them or repeat them on each different event specific markdown file.
Right. And I agree. It is a little bit confusing, but I think it being optional is the big thing here. Because like you don't even have to send it at all, technically, right? And if we find that people are, if people are asking for this feature more, I think we could actually move it from optional to actually required and then actually document it as well. But I do agree to Emil's point that we should probably link somewhere, maybe even in the markdown pages of these optional fields or these fields, the standard in general.
Yeah, I think today we might phrase the description of the standard fields a bit differently depending on what event it is. But I'm not sure if we need to. We could maybe omit them there and just link to the core spec then instead. Or does that make things less? I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's good to have a way to go from the event specific markdown to a place where all the fields are specified. So you don't need to look for the core spec file yourself. And I mean, if you're not aware that there is a core spec somewhere, of course you should know about the primer or something like that. But I'm not sure if I'm dragging it too long now, maybe.
Well, I think the goal, right, is to make it as easy as possible. And you know, and like I said, the nature of this field being optional, I think you know, I'm leaning more of like leaving it out because it doesn't seem too important just now. But if you want people, so it depends on what your guys' goal is. If you want people to actually, you know, like look at this field and make this more of a good practice, then I say 100% link it or even have it in the markdown.
So as you said as well there, Andrea, that this has been there for some time in the JSON files, but not in the markdown file. So it's not really the, you know, I think it's not required for this specific PR to add it everywhere. So maybe there should be a separate issue or PR on that if we should change things. So this one could do it as has been done until now, but we should probably, I think it would be valuable to have that in 0.2 scope to document this a bit clearer for all event types. So we make sure that all events are documented the same way and are easy to parse. I mean, by a human, I would, yeah. So if you see those examples that you showed there from the beginning where type is part of the subject, I would expect to be able to go to that event documentation and find information about all those fields, including the type. But it could be from a link to somewhere else, of course. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think all makes sense. I agree that we should keep things easy, but I also agree that it would be good to have this documented in 0.2. I'm trying to remember about the Go SDK. I will need to test whether the SDK actually expects it or not. Because when we designed this, we designed it so that the type was to be there because then it makes it easier to parse the content. But I don't remember in the Go SDK if it actually we rely on that or not. So there might be some need to update the SDK to make sure because it's optional. As long as we keep it optional, the SDK should not require it.
Out of curiosity, why did we make it optional? It seems like it's a pretty important required field even, right? Because like if it comes in and the payload is just whatever, even just me looking at the raw data, if I see a payload coming in and there's no type, how am I going to make sense of it? Like it seems like it should be a required field. I mean, this is a different discussion, but I'm just kind of curious like why it was decided to be optional.
But it's part of the event type, which is a higher level or in the context. So it's I mean, the information is already there in the event in the context object, context.event type or type. So this is just one part of that field, which we add here. So if you parse it with your eyes, you would see the event type there, and then you can understand what is the subject for this event? Subject type.
Oh, so it's a little bit redundant. Like I thought it was supposed to be something different, right?
No, it's redundant.
Oh,
right, yeah, it's the same information that is already in the event type field.
okay. I thought this was a subject because a subject could be different. Okay, no, it's the same thing. That's confusing. Okay.
Yeah, maybe that's why we need to document it and not just have it in the JSON.
Yeah, that's really okay. Yeah, 100%
so,
document that. That's really confusing.
Yeah, or I mean, it might be perfectly fine to just link to the core spec here. I think that's okay for things that are the same for all events. But I think that goes for the mandatory ones as well. Then.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I think I got a plan. I will update this PR to document it for incident types, and then I will make a follow-up PR to extend that to the other events, and we'll have some link to the core spec. All right. Yeah, thanks for that.
And Andrea, haven't done my homework either, so I need to review this as well, the full PR. I know that you've changed it some since I reviewed it last time, and I would like to look into it again, and I haven't found time to do it yet, but I hope I will get soon.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've not done any dramatic change, to be honest. I mean, there were some copy-paste issues Matthias identified and I fixed those. There was some text on the top, and I basically took your proposal for that. And
I know that I specified that I wanted some changes to be done, and I maybe they were already done those now, so I should just change that. But I need to look into it first, of course.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah.
All right. Moving forward on connecting events, is there any updates that we want to discuss today on this topic?
I went there to start introducing some information from when it comes to linking events here, using the links that they are, as we call them in Eiffel. That's not by any means done yet, but I started at least, and I added an example section there below, where I intend to have a, I mean, I'm not sure if that's the best example I started with there. There was an artifact. Where did it go? There, yeah. The artifact published, an artifact packaged corresponding events, how they would look if you would use links instead. I'm not sure, maybe that's something we can just discuss. What are the best examples of events we would like to see here? I think it makes quite good sense to have real JSON formed examples so we can see what they look like. But I'm not sure if this one about artifacts is the best one. I think this came up when we talked about the incidents as well, being detected and then resolved and so on. And there might be others. I mean, the fan-in scenario is something completely different from this. And we discussed if you have an environment and you have some artifact and you have different kinds of things you would like to relate into one, I don't know.
One thing that wasn't clear to me, Emil, which, because I read through this, right before the SIG here, is how do we compose this graph again? Let's say, I want to see what happened, as a graph, right? How would I go about doing that with the event links? Because it shows just pointing back, but it doesn't tell how each of these links relate. Do they relate to one another, or do they relate just to past thing that they're pointing back to, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so one event here in this example here, we see the links section there on 162. It contains a reference which is called target here then to something A234134 and so on. Right. And that's the event ID of the previous event. So you would create that graph by traversing or looking up that event by its ID, instead of looking for all events with a certain context ID. You would then, for each event you find, look at their links and then go the next step. And by an event graph, of course, if you have a graph database, that's an easy task to just get the full chain of events from one route to all its ancestors.
Okay, cool. So this, so I guess what my question is then, if we have cycled graphs, for instance, or let's say we have links, we have this array of links, and we have links that can links reference each other in the links?
No, I mean, it's quite natural when you have a pipeline of things happening, they happen in a certain order. And
right.
there is no way that something that happens now would reference something that happens later. I mean, the idea with these links is to reference what has happened later, so you don't need to include all that data from those
This is always
events
in the
into this
past.
one.
Yeah,
It's
makes
a
sense.
directed acyclic graph. It's a DAG.
Yeah, makes total sense.
So there are no cycles in these links. That doesn't really make sense to have, I would say. Because then, of course, it's impossible to traverse them in a good way. There's will be an infinite loop somewhere.
Yeah, okay. That's all I was wondering if that was possible.
Okay,
but yeah, just it being in the past makes total sense. And then with a graph database, because my concern is like how efficient this is, like to build this, but and then like going back, like so there's two questions here. How efficient, graph database, that might solve the issue with my concern of because we might have thousands, potentially tens of thousands of machines trying to hit this graph database endpoint, building these graphs out, right? And then my second question is, this event is still, or this idea is still going to have this global ID where we can kind of group all these things together. So it's kind of two questions there. Is the efficiency part, like how do we plan on tackling that, as well as, or what can we do to improve that or make that easy, and so on and so forth. And the second one is, we could still be able to group things with this global context ID, correct?
To me, there are many use cases which are hard to really handle through just a global context ID or a set of global context IDs. But that's something we should elaborate on a bit. When what kind of use cases do we see these references for, or these different connecting events references for? But according to, regarding the efficiency thing there, we have used this for years in Ericsson already, and we have thousands of these links to many of the events. The chain of events is, we have thousands in them in those chains, and we actually don't use a graph database yet. We have discussed it for long that we should switch out our current MongoDB database to a graph database, but so far we haven't seen the real urgent need for it, because the MongoDB database we have is currently solving our issues. It handles our requests for many queries per second in some cases, and since these event IDs are then indexed efficiently in the database, so the ID that is referenced here is always on the same location in each event that is sent. So that field is always indexed in this database, in the MongoDB database that we use, the document database. Then it's very quick to find those, and we have internal database functions built into our MongoDB instance, which does these graph traversals then, but based on document data, and that's quick, I would say. So okay. I don't see any problems there really. So that's for, at least for when you do the upstream searches, because then you search for proper IDs just which are indexed. When you do a downstream search, it's we don't have a huge problem there either, but that's potentially a thing where the graph database would be a lot more efficient when you traverse the graph downstream, because then you would need to ask, give me all events which has this ID as its event.id field or something.
And that's more of my concern is the downstream portion of it. Looking up the ID, I think is quick. That's databases, but like traversing, I think is more of a concern downstream where you need all the events. But
it's, as I said, it's not a big problem really. We're with our experience at least. So, but of course we should look into it, and I would very much look forward to having a graph database instead, or maybe we are looking into multi-model databases like ArangoDB, which is both a document database and a graph database in the same, which I think is very good for this, because we would always want to look at the document lookups as well, or property lookups, not just graphs. So we need both, the best of both worlds. And I think that maybe a multi-model database like ArangoDB is probably the best choice there.
Yeah,
for
I think
something.
this goes back to the global ID. Like the benefit there is being able to look up everything for a particular, span or an event, is just being able to search without needing, to do this one-off like traversal every single time, downstream.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But what you would have then is that you get a bag of events back. And the only way you can arrange those events internally within that bag is just ordering them by time. You don't have any relations in between those events. All of them just contain the same global ID. And then it's up to you to make best sense of how they internally are connected to each other, or what happened in what happened in parallel, or what happened in serial, and what happened because of what.
well, I mean, like how tracing works, right? You have a trace ID, which is the global ID, and then you have a span ID, right? Which right now you just have the span ID. So I'm wondering, like, if we want to use Eiffel, we might need, if we want to use Eiffel within CDEvents, we might need something like a global ID, or in this case, kind of like the same thing as a trace ID, if you will, to kind of make sense of these long running, events, or, just knowing when an event started versus when it ended, and then being able to grab all those events that are associated with this ID with a single query. I think it's needed, to be honest.
I would be interested to see that use case, what it would look like really. And that's a perfect scenario to look into. How would that use case be solved with the global IDs or span IDs, or a combination of them, or with links, or maybe a combination of these context IDs and links? Maybe that's also an option.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not too concerned with, what we do to solve it. I just think we need a global ID somewhere where we can kind of reference, all these events together. And if it's a combination, or if it's, modifying Eiffel, whatever that solution is, I think is fine. It's just that we need to have it though, and I really need to put the emphasis on need, because like when we're talking, because like my concern is, like, me being at Apple, like we have, 1,000, I'm like, we're talking like hundreds of thousands of machines, right, that are going to be potentially asking for these links downstream. So we need to make sure that this, there's an easy way of querying this. I think a global ID solves that. And I think what I could do is I could add to the document potential use cases for the global ID, and we can kind of figure out which proposal works best, or with which I guess which proposal, we have 3 in here, works best, and if Eiffel can handle this particular use case, which it sounds like it can, but it looks like it needs to be a little bit tweaked.
I look forward to that. It would be great. So I think that those use cases could be described on a general level on this document, on how to connect events, what we need to connect events, and then these 3 different options, or if we find more, would then reference how can we solve those use cases by the different types of the connecting references that we provide here.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Then I'll make that an action item for me then, to add a few use cases, and then we can, I think for next week, we can then discuss potential options for each of the sub proposals within this proposal, and then kind of go start making a decision. And then with that being said, I think this, Andrea, this is not going to make February 16th, unfortunately. Yeah, so we're probably going to need to push this out. Yeah,
that's clear. But yeah, no, I think it's great discussions. There are a couple of things I wanted to add as well. So one thing is there are 2 main use cases that we have in mind, and one is like one tool triggering another tool, or a chain of that, and the other use case is multiple tools doing their things and sending events, and someone collecting all the events and using those events all that event data to show a graph, calculate metrics, or whatever. I would call it kind of observability type of use case. And I think in the second use case, we can assume that we have a database with all these events stored. In the first use case, we cannot necessarily assume that. So, and I think that's maybe something that we need to differentiate, and when we consider the use cases. So just I wanted to add that. I think for what it feels to me like is that there are things that links can accomplish, of course, that a global ID cannot, and the other way around. So like it feels to me like we're going towards a scenario where we would support global IDs and links, which goes a bit against what we said in the beginning. We want to keep it as simple as possible. But for instance, going back to what you were discussing earlier, we can select a number of global IDs, events for global ID, but how do we structure them in a way that goes beyond just looking at the timestamp, which is what tracing does, but we might have a more complex set of relationship. So if we had both, we could like select them using a global ID and then use the event links to structure the graph, for instance. And the other way around, I mean, if we only have event IDs, I think you can structure the events, but you don't have this information about which events belong to a certain distributed transaction, if you will, because we don't have this global ID that starts at some point and ends at some other point. So I think that it seems to me like there are features in both of these two that do not exist in the other one. But if there are ideas on how we could achieve all the use cases with just one of these two, I think, of course.
Yeah, I think for the Eiffel version of this, I mean, we don't use really any global event IDs anywhere, and that's perfectly fine with the use cases we have. So maybe we can describe the needs that you see for global IDs using these links as well, and maybe the description would then assume things that we might not agree on in the CDEvents project that we want to have. So that it would be very good, I think, to nail down the actual use cases and see, because as you said, Andrea, it would be good to have maybe just one of these solutions and not have two ways to do the same thing if we consider it the same thing. Yeah, so I think looking at what use cases we have for this connected events is very important.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that global IDs aren't really two ways of solving the problem. It's you're taking a given solution and giving it the necessary information to solve another particular issue, right? It's like it's giving, like, just having a global ID by itself, like you can get, like all the events that happen, but there's no way to like construct, the DAG for this, right? But like with links, you can at least construct a DAG, right? And the whole goal with like connecting events is to be able to construct some sort of DAG representing how these things relate to one another. And a global ID doesn't really do that. It only relates to the actual global event that occurred, right? So I think it's solving two very different problems, but the global ID in the context of links gives it the ability to, one, search more optimally when you're going downstream, and then secondly, be able to group things in a way where you now know the beginning and the end of whatever we want to call this, a span, if you will, or a whole event. So I don't want to say that there are two different ways of solving the same problem, because I think global ID is if you want to say global ID solves it, it does it very poorly. I guess it is what I want to say.
Yeah, and I think if you're fine with, I mean, if we would be able to prove that the link traversal is efficient enough, regardless of more or less how many events are connected, then this global ID could actually just be part of the first event in that chain, and then you have it. I mean, then you can look up that first event using the global ID, and then you get the full chain of events using those links instead. Maybe.
Yeah, or I mean, or we could just change the links to be like a link, links to be like the links maybe being an object with a global ID at the top and then an array like for the actual links. So that might be an option as well.
Yeah, but one thing here is that it's not really up to the producer to know all the circumstances in which it has been run, so to say, to me at least. I mean,
yeah, this is
I could
consumer.
see multiple cases where a global ID would be added on top of some events as an after construct. I mean, now we also want to group these events for we want to know some new kind of information, and then I mean that information, those IDs are not there yet in that event then, because that event has already been sent. Not sure if I'm making myself making sense.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying, but the thing is like when you're introducing a global ID, that's the thing, right? The global ID needs to be passed down to these. Well, they don't need to technically be passed down to these links, right? But it's the producer that knows about this global ID. This is always going to be
to know it somehow, and there needs to be multiple IDs, I guess. You show there, Andre, in the top here that there are multiple in the document there, that there are multiple different types of workflows, as you call them then. And I assume all those workflows would have their own global IDs or workflow IDs in your lingo.
Yes, indeed.
We would need to add all those then to be able to make sense of the events and group them through these IDs. We would need to add all of those IDs to all events somehow. So then all that information needs to be passed to all producers of events.
I don't know how. There should only ever be one global ID.
But then there is not much sense of having it, is it? I mean, I don't really get it. What would that be if you relate it to, okay, say a source change, then the new source change comes in and you build and you start a full pipeline. Is the global ID then started from that source by the source change somehow, connected to it? And then the next source change within a new global ID. Is that the use case you see then, or?
Yeah. I mean, similar to like tracing, right? Like it's very much very similar. So like, yeah, like an artifact chain, whatever it is to start the whole, since we're talking about, continuous integration and delivery, that whole process, the very first entry point, right? In every system, there is an entry point, right? And in this case, it might be an artifact changing. It might be, like a pull request starting a whole group of things, which is also an artifact. So yeah, it could be very well just be an artifact changing that creates this global ID and then propagates it down, right?
But if you want to reference things that happened before that, well, what was it artifact built of? Then you don't know that there. Then you need to include the chain of things, reactions, or events that happened before that artifact was built as well. But in the source change,
whatever the starting event was, that would create the global ID. And if the artifact that was created doesn't have a global ID, it would create a global ID at that point then.
Yeah, but that could have happened years ago. I mean, the last version of libc or something was quite old, and then you wouldn't get. I mean, when that libc commit was coming into the original repository, should that global ID then be part of all succeeding things that include anything related to the libc and downstream? Then it doesn't really make sense. I mean, everything in the whole world.
Yeah, I think that's going. Yeah, that's going a little too crazy with the global ID. I think
why? I mean, I wouldn't see any real start and finish of this. I mean, to me, it's more or less endless.
No, because you could argue the same thing for tracing. The very same, you can say that same argument like with tracing. Yeah. You say, oh, but this trace ID could exist 10 years ago and propagate down. Tracing solved this problem, right? This is a completely feasible solution to being able to group things with the global ID. And I think things like, oh, when does it start, and whatnot, is just however, your system is designed, right? And in cases with libc, they might decide that, hey, our events start at when we create the artifact. That's up to the system administrators, right, or whoever's designing the system. So I don't think that example, because like I said, for me, is your example, or any example that we come up with, needs to be an example that tracing also cannot do. And tracing does the whole libc thing. It knows when things start, it knows when things finish. And CDEvents, like, it's not tracing, but it has the same flow of well, at least for links, it should have the same flow of being able to represent how things are connected and how things are queried, in my opinion. Mostly because we want things to be efficient, and we want to know, like, if I'm a consumer, we want to know when things begin and end, right? We need some sort of way of representing that. And then having them just traverse a graph, like, if you have multiple systems that are doing this, like, it's not going to scale well. Like, it's going to be pretty heavy.
Yeah, for sure, it will be heavy. But if you consider the case, for example, if you find a vulnerability in libc, and you would like to know where is this library included, in what software, what software is vulnerable due to this vulnerability we found now. I mean, to me, that's traceability, to be able to find downstream what has included this version of libc downstream. And then it's totally out. I mean, it's some other companies, some other organizations which has created those, and it would be great if all those could be referenced somehow. And of course, if we should be able to solve that using a global ID, then all of those downstream inclusions of libc and everything that follows from it should include the same global ID. And then it's just a big billion event bucket with no interconnections internally at all. It's just but I must admit that I'm not too familiar with how the OpenTelemetry trace context and trace IDs are really set up. I assume that there is some good way of hierarchically setting up trace context and trace IDs hierarchically downstream there.
Oh, so yeah, definitely.
I assume that there is a good way to do it, and I would look forward to seeing how that would look like. So it's just, I mean, I don't think we have just one Go global ID. We have multiple IDs here in the play, and probably a hierarchical view of IDs somehow. Both hierarchical and multi-dimensional, as you mentioned there, Andre, on the different scenarios as well.
Okay, so from what I hear, so I want to take a little step back real quick, because I think we kind of like jumped the gun too quickly a little bit. Okay, so from what it sounds like, okay, so this is actually my fault, because I made the assumption that people were familiar with tracing, which is not the case, and that's my fault. So I think I should probably write, because you did a great job, Emil, with writing your section with Eiffel. I think I should spend a time, or maybe Andrea, because I know, Andrea, you're a little familiar with tracing, how tracing works as well, is write a section on how tracing handles events with the global ID, trace ID, and a span ID. That way, we all have the necessary information to make the decision of what to go using, or what to use going forward. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. I look very much forward to be able to compare these, because I have a hard time comparing, and that's one of the reasons is that I'm not too fluent in OpenTelemetry and how trace contexts are set up.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, and and that's completely fair. That's my fault.
No, it's no one's fault. It's just assumptions, but
yeah, assumptions. Yes. So okay, cool. So yeah, we'll definitely, we definitely need to add that. And then next week, I will add the use case for global ID, and then see, Andrea will add the details for trace context, and then we can compare the two, and then hopefully finalize. I think we're still going to be a little bit of purgatory in the deciding realm next week, but I definitely think we'll have a lot more information to start funneling down like a more correct solution or the best solution for CDEvents.
Great.
Cool. I wanted to add one thing to the use case of what is libc that you were mentioning, Emil, and so I think one thing to consider is what is the scope or availability of the database of events, and what assumption do we want to make, because if we think that database exists within an organization, or if we want to consider connecting events that coming from outside organizations, then can we assume that this event's ID will be known by other organizations as well? If that is the case, then we need to have some kind of public database of events.
No. Oh, absolutely. I didn't add that detail to my example there, but for sure, no. There will be no single database knowing of all events in the world, of course. But there will be references to the different I don't know, organizations or domains, as I would call them. It could be source groups or whatever, which and through those domains, then you should be able to query some other database to continue this chain upstream or downstream further.
Okay.
Sure, you would need, and then of course it's up to the organization that has created that event chain if they are fine with exposing that data or not, and that's totally their concern. If they don't feel like exposing their internal event data through a database, then the event chain will not be public and not possible to traverse into their organization. That's perfectly fine as well.
Yeah. Just thinking whether this goes into somehow overlapping a bit with some other standards or specification that exist in the area of like software bill of materials and
yeah, it somehow maybe relates there, and that's something that we have been discussing internally as well now when the SBOMs has been more of a thing, starting to get more interesting. Maybe there is something there that we should try to relate to as well, and maybe replace what we do in IFA with such references instead, and that's perfectly fine then. But at least we need to have an idea on how to trace all the way, I would say. And I'll use the word tracing for example, looking at where has this vulnerability been included downstream. That's tracing to me. And also upstream from where, how much has this artifact been tested in the unit testing of the lib somewhere or whatever.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, I think it's important that we are clear what are the use cases we want to address, and but yeah, maybe we can think of having some conversations with other groups about this, to see what they are doing in terms of, this traceability of artifacts, and yeah, so maybe there are some overlaps, and maybe there is space for inviting people also to the SIG to discuss this. And okay, but yeah, I'm kind of diverging a bit. All right, I guess we didn't get to the roadmap review, but I think I'm really happy to actually move forward on these conversations about connecting events as one of the key features of the protocol, I think, and we should really, I'm really happy to see if we can make some progress there. So I think that's time very well spent to me. Yeah, so we can try and go through the roadmap next time. I think in the meanwhile, I mean, it is clear that the release will not happen on the 16th.
Yeah, I don't know, should we try to get in both incident events and connecting events, or should we think it's enough with incident events to make a release, or do we want both, or should we wait with that decision?
Yeah, I think if we have one new feature, it might be worth to go ahead and make a release, and also to keep the pace going and make sure we update the SDKs accordingly. And
I think so too, and then I think incident events are quite close to being done, and it would be great to get those out. I think given our discussion today, connecting events might be quite some time still before we get there.
Right, and I think incident events, that's a huge enough, that's a big enough feature where I think it definitely dictates it can dictate its own release.
I think so too.
Yeah, so
I would propose that we try to get it in, and maybe for that reason pause the connecting events until we get the incident events done. So we try to get that out as soon as possible, but then of course at the same time, if we have time to continue with the connecting events in the meantime.
Okay, that's good. All right, we are at time, but thanks again. Great discussion today, and yeah, have a great rest of your day, and maybe see you later in the afternoon meeting.
All right, you guys have a good one.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
See you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.